Welcome to the Law School Admissions Simplified Podcast, where we talk about all things LSAT, law school admissions, and otherwise. I'm Ben Parker, and I do LSAT prep and law school admissions full time. If you like what we do here, you can find me on Instagram, where I post about the admissions process at lsasimplified, or on my website, lsasimplified.com. I've written an LSAT book you can find on Amazon, which is called LSA Simplified LSAT Primer. And I also host free LSAT sessions once a month, as well as paid monthly courses, tutoring, and on-demand options. Cool. So today we are talking to Stacy, and I really should have looked up how to pronounce this. I think it's Hsu. I'm really bad at pronouncing things, so apologies to Stacy if I mispronounce her name. But yeah, Stacy and I actually went to high school together. Not that I actually didn't know Stacy during high school. I knew who she was, but it was a big high school, and I was pretty quiet in high school, and she was doing bigger and better academic things than I was. So she and I did not have a lot of classes together, maybe one or two throughout the time. But yeah, so she went to St. John's Law School to start and then transferred to NYU, which is a pretty interesting path because I know some people intend on transferring. Generally, I don't recommend trying to transfer, but it can work out. Just for most people, it doesn't. However, Stacy has that perspective of like really doing well in law school and getting big law associate positions. And yeah, it'll be an interesting thing with her. So I hope you enjoy what she has to tell you. Yeah, I guess to start with, Stacy, how did you first get interested in law school? Like, what was your path to wanting to attend?
Yeah, so honestly, I kind of applied to law school on a whim. I was actually pre-med throughout my entire undergrad process. And even until, after graduation as well, I think I graduated May of 2021, and I ultimately ended up deciding to start the law school application process in August of 2021. So it was kind of like a snap decision, but it was mostly based on the fact that I went to college in New York. I kind of saw New York through COVID. So it was a pretty unique experience, and ultimately ended up deciding that I didn't want to go into like direct primary care. In high school, I had toyed around a little bit with the idea of like going into law. I had interned at the district attorney's office. But it's something that I didn't pursue seriously in undergrad. And then, I thought I might just apply to law school on a whim. I ended up really, thinking that that was probably the best decision for me. And it turns out that that's absolutely true. Like everything I've done in law school and everything that I've had a connection with in the legal world has been the best experience of my life. So I don't think there was like a super thought through process. I think a lot of the thinking came after I had already started law school, but ultimately it was a great choice for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really impressive that you decided to apply in August of 21 and then because you're a 2L now, right?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you did that really fast. How how did the LSAT go for you? Did you just like immediately dive right into it and do it in like a few months?
Yeah, so it was kind of like a chaotic process. I studied for it starting in August. I studied for about like 3 months, and then I just ended up taking the October LSAT. I didn't do like amazingly, but I did well enough to where I was just like, might as well apply and see what happens. And ended up getting into St. John's with a great scholarship. And so I kind of just decided to go for it.
Right, yeah. And yeah, that's the funny thing because I don't know. To get into like kind of I guess not, I don't want to say lower tier, but like not like an NYU or Columbia school.
Right,
You don't need like a 175. It certainly helps.
right. Yeah.
You see the diminishing returns. But that's so impressive to do it in 3 months. How did you kind of do the self-study route and just like do it yourself, or did you like look into any help for it?
So I used Seven Sage. I didn't actually finish the program. It was more self-study. I think I
Yeah.
just like every night, because I was working full-time as well. So every night from like 10 p.m. to midnight, I would like force myself to study for 2 hours and did that for like about 3 months. And then it wasn't super regulated. I kind of just like did whatever I thought I needed to improve on that specific day. And then ended up taking the LSAT. I think if I could do it again, I would have probably like done a more regimented program or like
Right.
set myself more to a schedule. But it ended up working out.
Yeah,
So yeah.
definitely. Yeah, it's tricky because like I think going into the LSAT, like when I was studying too, you just don't know what you're doing. I ordered the
Yeah.
a bunch of textbooks on the internet and like
Right.
working through them, like I improved pretty quickly, but it was definitely not efficient. Like looking back
Yeah.
as someone who could do it all over again. But that's exciting. So did you just take the test once then, or did you take it multiple times?
I did just take it once. Yeah. Actually, so my October LSAT, there was like a glitch in the system or something
Yeah.
where everyone who was taking it that day, like they had to retake their test and it shut down. So technically I took it twice, but I only took like one administration of the test.
Yeah, I remember that. I actually that's
Yeah, it's not
starting
good.
to do LSAT. One of the first people I actually ever worked with went to St. John's because the first year I did it, I had very
Oh,
few people. I'll tell
yeah.
you what it is after. Just, I mean, there's a very how big is St. John's? It's a good size, right? Like you don't know everyone in your or you're not there.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think one class, like 1 year is 270.
Okay.
No, it's 235 for mine, but this year they actually increased a lot in size. So I think this class is 275.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one. It's the kind of like really high tuition, but then lots of full rides. Just looking at their 5
Hmm.
or like it's pretty
Yes.
fascinating how all the schools play the game differently. Because some schools just
Yes.
like North Dakota doesn't give scholarship. It's like who's going to North Dakota if you're not getting a full ride?
Oh,
Um,
that's
it's just
interesting.
a weird one. And then Arizona State, no one pays full price. They give literally everyone a
Mm,
scholarship, which is kind of fun because like
yeah.
at that point it's not even really like full price. It's just like a pretend imaginary tuition amount.
Right. Yeah, that's
That's
funny.
like me complaining about. I'm like very in the admissions world. Everything kind of falls apart after that. So yeah, with
Yeah.
admissions, how did you like? Did you kind of cast a wide net? Was it largely New York schools, or how did you approach that?
Yeah, so it was entirely New York schools. I knew that I wanted to stay in New York, and I feel like when applying, I didn't really know what I was doing just because, I have no lawyers in the family. I didn't really know anyone who had gone through that process because everyone that I was connected to in undergrad was connected to mostly like the medical world. So I think I didn't end up applying to a lot of schools that I probably should have. I'm pretty sure I only applied to like St. John's, CU Boulder,
Yeah.
Cardozo, and Fordham, and then didn't even touch like NYU or Columbia. But I think if I did a if I did it again, I probably would have
Yeah.
cast a wider net.
Well, unfortunately for you, it ended up working out just fine.
Yeah, yeah,
I find a lot of folks where I mean, it's so hard because you have to start the admissions process so early for law schools to like really maximize
right,
it. Like, do people really want to burn 2 years on applying? It's just unfortunate. But yeah, that's
right.
fine. And then so you applied to those schools. What made you choose St. John's out of was it just the best offer that you got?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get a full ride at St. John's, so that was kind of a no-brainer for me. I also did consider Cardozo when I first got that offer because they have a great intellectual property program, and I knew that that's something that I wanted to look into. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like if keeping
Yeah.
tuition costs low is better.
Well, and this is a total tangent from kind of the I guess journey to law school, but did you have like a biology undergrad? Like, is that what you majored in? So
Yeah, so I majored in bio and public health.
okay, so does that make you attractive to firms? Like the fact that you're patent bar eligible, or like how much of a thing is that?
Yeah, so I think it definitely does like help me stand out, not just to firms, but I honestly think that's what helped me like get into St. John's as well with such a great scholarship. It's just like law schools and also big firms are looking for a diversity of backgrounds. I wouldn't necessarily say that me being patent bar eligible is what was a deciding factor for the firm that I'm at taking me in, but it's more just like because I studied biology, I have a ton of research experience. I kind of have a lot of experience on like the scientific side of things, and just have a lot of experience with like research, which I think can be rare in like the mainstream legal world before someone matriculates into law school. But I actually don't think I plan on taking the patent bar, so that's not like a determining factor for
Right.
anyone.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's interesting. And the reason I asked is like I have no clue. I also had a biology undergrad. It was
Oh, wow.
it was at CU though. It was called
Yeah.
evolutionary biology, and it was basically like
Oh,
bio taken to the extreme. Not a lot of
yeah.
math, a lot of like big thing eats little thing eats plant. So like very straightforward.
Right.
But
That's really cool.
it sounds STEM, so people aren't impressed by it, even though I have a limited like I couldn't do like a T-test if someone quizzed me on it. So yeah, it sounds like the process went pretty well. And then you got to St. John's. How was the adjustment to law school from a largely STEM background? Like how was the studying and all that stuff?
Yeah, so I think there's actually a lot more crossover than one might think at first glance. I feel like, especially in the first year with like the doctrinal law school classes, there is a lot of like problem solving that you need to do, a lot of logistical analysis. So I found myself like exercising a lot of the same muscles that I was in undergrad. And I think the trickiest thing for me was probably like learning how to restructure my writing style, because all the writing that I had done in the past was like creative writing from high school, and legal writing is
Yeah.
very different. And so, I know a lot of people with kind of that background in undergrad have a little bit of a head start in that regard. So I think that was the most difficult part for me, but I don't think it was like extremely difficult. I also do happen to know a couple of other STEM background people from St. John's, and they have expressed to me that they struggled with the same thing, but they all ended up doing like amazingly. I think a lot of them were actually like top of the class. So yeah.
Yeah, because once again, like not much of an expert on law school, but to my very brief understanding, the issue spotting does seem like a very formulaic kind of thing on the finals, where like
Right.
if you are approaching it in like a very analytical, like here's the problem, how do I solve it sort of way, instead of coming up with a creative answer, that might help you. So yeah, I mean, out of St. John's, you worked at a firm this past summer, right? Like
I
is that
did.
a law firm? I think it was, but like, I don't want to
Yes.
judge. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have to imagine not everyone from St. John's is getting interviews at those firms. Do you like, so is it safe to say you got a pretty good GPA? Like not to pry too much, but did law school go pretty well academically? Or at least the first part?
Yeah. So I think, that my first semester of law school is definitely my best semester, like overall. I did do pretty well that semester, and so I think that set me up for a lot of like the job offer type things that I got for the summer. And yeah, so at St. John's, I think it is a little bit harder for one to land a position like that. Um, One of my good friends was actually a summer associate with me in the same class, and he is
Oh,
still at St. John's. But I think I was maybe like one of three or four who ended up in Big Law that first year.
oh wow, that's smaller than I would have expected. I know it's obviously,
Yeah, it is pretty small.
but yeah, I mean, what I always tell people, like when they're asking, is like, if you really want to count on Big Law, you should really plan on going to one of those large schools. Not that you have to count on Big Law, but it's unfortunate. I think there's a lot of misconceptions among like pre-law folks where it's like everyone out of St. John's gets these. It's like, nah, kind of. Some of them do. Um, and there is the public data, but it can be really hard to read. Like even I have a hard time
Mm,
when I do this. This says about 12
yeah.
go to Big Law, but this is from 2018. So I don't know. That
I
does.
think that is true though. I think
Okay.
so. Yeah, like first year Big Law is definitely hard to get all around.
Right.
But I know that St. John's typically does send a few more people to Big Law in 2L OCI. So for their second year, like summer associateships, there are quite a few people going to Big
Oh,
Law. And I think that definitely is like geographic. If St. John's was located anywhere else, I don't think that would be
oh, for sure.
a
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Like Fordham has like really high
Oh,
place.
yeah.
And I mean, not that Fordham's a bad school by any stretch, but compared to like where they're ranked, it's like they substantially punch above their weight. Which
Right.
partly is probably due to reputation, networking, as well as like they're right there. And like,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, so that's cool. And how was the summer? Like, did you enjoy the work you did at that firm?
Yeah, I really liked it. I really appreciated that specific firm because they did a lot of emphasis on like DE&I, which I think is kind of rare in Big Law. But especially for like a 1L summer associateship, I think it's great to like emphasize, recruiting a diverse class. But beyond that, I really enjoyed how they structured it. We had like a rotational structure, so I was rotating through the finance, real estate, and litigation groups. So it was just nice to kind of like get my hands on different types of work because I went into my first summer not really knowing what I wanted to end up doing. And I thought that I wanted to go into transactional work, but ended up actually really liking litigation. So that ended up helping me inform my decision to apply to litigation positions for my second year summer.
Nice. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
awesome to hear. Yeah, it is interesting kind of always hearing people's plans because I talk to like
right.
a lot of like poli sci grads that I don't know
Yeah.
know something about law school, but they're like, I'm gonna be an agent for an NFL player. I'm like, maybe. I wouldn't count on that. Like, it's possible, but I would certainly not be banking my future on this like pretty difficult job. Or I don't know. It's like well-meaning. People like they're wanting to like argue in front of like the International Court of Justice. I'm like, I think that happens, but not so straightforward. Okay, so yeah, so
Right.
that went well. How early did you decide that you wanted to like transfer to others? And was it like a definitive process, or were you just like kind of exploring it? How did that go?
Yeah. So to be honest, I feel like the advice someone always gives, law students is that you shouldn't go into an institution with the intention of transferring.
Right.
Like everyone is always like, you should be absolutely happy to graduate where you first matriculate to law school.
Mhm.
And I think that is true to some extent. Like I definitely made my decision to go to St. John's knowing that if I graduated from St. John's, I would be perfectly happy. But it was always like a thought that was in the back of my mind. And I think that's like one of the reasons that I kind of regretted not applying to NYU for my, like first round of applications.
Right.
I think it became more of a realistic thing after my first semester, after I'd gotten my like first semester grades back, and after I had gone through the recruiting process for my 1L job. It more and more like materialized, and I think that in the second semester, it became more clear to me that it was like something that was feasible to do, and so I focused a lot more of my energy into kind of setting myself up for that. But when it comes to the transfer process itself, I actually wrote my application after I had already finished my second semester. And I
Okay.
feel like I submitted my application pretty late. I think I submitted it on the last day. So like would not suggest doing that. But yeah, it was mostly after my first year had ended.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I'm just looking at NYU's 509 report right now, and it looks like they take a
Mhm.
good amount of transfers. Like I mean,
Yes.
there's two of you from St. John, so you had
Yes.
come with you. And then all like they had seven from GW, which is kind of, I mean, it's not a bad school. That's just a lot from one school.
GW sends 15% out as transfers every year. I did not know that, but one of my good friends is also a transfer from GW, and she knows a bunch of people who transferred out. So
Yeah,
it's
it
kind of
makes
interesting.
like it's not a bad school, but there's just so much above them, like right there. Like without even thinking about New York, there's still like Georgetown right there. Um,
Right.
and I have to imagine a decent amount of Georgetown's transferring up as well. So I don't know, kind of an
Yeah.
interesting process. And was it just NYU when you wanted to transfer, or were you looking at like Columbia or other schools as well, or was it NYU from the start?
Yeah. So I think when I first decided on like legitimately pursuing the transfer process, I spoke to one of my professors, actually my contracts professor from my first semester. She's like a great mentor to me, and I had a meeting with her and we talked about like transferring in general. She actually did her LLM at NYU,
Okay.
and I knew that I wanted NYU to be on my list, so we kind of narrowed that down. But she also suggested that I apply to like I think 7 schools, like the top 7. And so those were on my list for a while, but like I thought about it more and more, and I was like, I don't know if I would want to actually like go to a school that's outside of New York City. And so that's kind of how my list got narrowed down. And then just like speaking to people who have gone to Columbia and then like UPenn, I decided that those weren't the right choices for me. So at the end of the day, I did only apply to NYU.
Nice. Yeah, and if you know it's the one you're gonna be at, and honestly,
Yeah.
like, I have to imagine your opportunities wouldn't be too bad out of St. John's given how high up in the class you probably were. I mean, I often tell people if you go to like a school like St. John's and you're in the bottom half of the class, you should really like reconsider if this is like the path for you. Not to be harsh, like I'm never trying to like gatekeep, but like also like eyes wide open. Um, but yeah,
Right.
so that's awesome. And how was the transfer process? Was it pretty smooth? Like, did you find law school to be a easy transition to go from one to another, or was it an adjustment?
I think it was actually more of an adjustment than I originally anticipated. But that's just because like no one really transfers, especially from St. John's. I think there were 2 from my year, but before that, St. John's has barely had any other transfers. And when I spoke to the administration, they told me that when people were transferring out, it was because of like geographic reasons. So it was a little bit difficult just because I found it hard to find people who had gone through the same thing. But I will say that it's been great to have like my transfer cohort at NYU. We do have a couple of classes that we're all in just because the credits don't necessarily transfer over like
Okay.
perfectly. So for example, there's like a lawyering class that I'm in with only transfers, and then there's like a class called legislation in the regulatory state that I was also in with only transfers. So I did make a lot of my friends that way. And then I think that something I've done to just like integrate myself more is to just become more involved in my extracurriculars. For example, I'm on moot court, and a couple of my really great friends I met through there, so that's been great. But it is difficult, I will say. And then something that I feel like a lot of people don't tell you when it comes to the transferring process is that the academics can be quite different as well. Maybe it's just a product of the fact that when I was at St. John's, I was taking 1L doctrinal classes, and those do tend to be a little more like cut and dry. But I found that a lot of my classes at NYU and the professors they're teaching in more of like a theoretical way, and it can be a little bit more difficult to follow, I would say. So there's almost like a shift in thinking that you have to actively do when you're in this process. But I think my second semester has started off a lot better, and I feel more comfortable. So the process is going for sure.
Right, yeah, and you've already set yourself on a good trajectory, so you should be fine. But yeah, it's always interesting. I wonder how much of it is also due to just the caliber of not your competition, but like your classmates, because like no shade on the St. John's folks, but like it is a different level of like academic person at
Yeah,
NYU, so that has to be
yeah, absolutely.
And do you find how was St. John's? Was it competitive or were people pretty cooperative there?
So it's definitely like still competitive in the traditional sense, but it's not like toxic by any means. I think actually at St. John's there is a great kind of air of camaraderie just because like they're a little bit lower ranked. So I think everyone there is a little scrappier, and everyone kind of knows that they want to work really hard to get to the top. And so there is like I met a lot of my great friends that way. We all just ended up staying in the library until like 10 p.m. and studying every day. And so I think that type of thing happens less at NYU. And then maybe it's because I'm a 2L and there's less pressure to get that like
Right.
1L externship or internship. But I definitely think that at St. John's, there is kind of a different mentality because you know that there's more competition to be at the top, to be in positions where you can get like those good jobs.
Yeah, yeah, that's why I was wondering. I was just wondering how it like was different between like kind of like very national elite law school and St. John's, which like is not a bad school, but also like very much so a regional like New York school. So that's
Mhm.
interesting to hear because most of my folks, I'm very much so a fan of getting full rides outside of like
Yes.
the top like I don't even say the top 14 because I don't think paying full price for Georgetown makes sense. But like for like I like to make fun of Georgetown. It goes back to like a rant I had. Not that there's anything wrong with Georgetown. They just like really like to pump their tires. And it's like the whole
Yeah.
Georgetown University Law Center, that annoys me. The whole calling it G, it's like my pet peeve. I don't get it. Or now they're top 15 because UCLA bumped them. And I got in an argument with someone about what the top 14 is. And I was like, it's the top 14. They're like, no, it's the historical top 14. I'm like,
Oh
okay,
my gosh.
this is stupid. Um, but yeah, that's just Reddit for you. Not to like tangent on.
Yeah.
Did you ever get into like the law school admissions Reddit, or did you stay clean from that?
Oh my gosh. I did, and I should not have.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely something that is very anxiety inducing and is not always like accurate. So
Oh, for
I
sure.
think, yeah,
Yeah.
like it's just like, if you want to avoid being anxious, maybe don't go on it. But at the end of the day, it is like a good source of information. I was on it actually the most for my transfer process because that was the most like anxiety inducing part of law school for me. Just because not a lot of people transfer once again. So I was like religiously hunting down answers as to like when people get phone calls and like when people submit essays and things like that. But I wouldn't say it's something that's necessary. It's just something that if you're going to be anxious either way, you might as well have that information.
Right. Yeah, my take on it as well is like you have to be a strong emotional person if you're gonna hang out on Reddit, because like you'll think
Yeah.
everyone has like a 4.0 180 if you're hanging out on there. And then people get
Yeah.
negative too, like which always is weird to me. It's like I get that technically it is kind of a zero-sum game where if someone gets a seat, that is one fewer seat for someone else. But it's like if you're a good applicant,
Right.
that one person is not making the difference.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
I and it also changes because like I'm kind of a weirdo where even though like I'm young, I've been around for like 4 or 5 cycles now. Because like I started when I was
Wow. Yeah.
like I started
Yeah.
I took the LSAT when I was a sophomore, which
Oh my gosh. That's very
yeah.
early.
Well, I just figured I'd get it out of the way. It's like I was already at my goal score, which is funny because like back when I took it, I scored above the 75th percentile for every country, sorry, for every school in the country, and now it's like below median at like 3 schools because it's just gotten so wild with the inflation. But oh well, I'm not going to law school. It doesn't
Wow.
really matter. And at this point, like I'm good enough at the test. I've done like my 10,000 hours, so I'm
Oh
kind of
my gosh.
like
Yeah.
nerd out over. But I don't know. I thought the LSAT was fun, so that's how I ended up doing this. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
that's good. So you said you were doing some extracurriculars at NYU. You said moot court. Are you doing other things as well, or is it primarily that?
Yeah, so there's moot court. That's definitely the one that takes up the most time because at NYU, moot court is actually, it has journal status.
Okay.
So it's because we write the case book with all the moot court problems for like the schools in the country.
Oh,
So there's a lot of writing involved there. But beyond that, I'm in the law school's a cappella group, which is like
oh,
super
nice.
random thing to do, but it's just like something fun. And it's nice to do something that's like not academic with people who are also in the same position as you. And yeah, so I think those two are the things that I'm like mostly focused on. I'm also a part of like the Asian Pacific American Law Students Association, like I was at St. John's. But those are kind of just things that I would consider like I would probably be a part of those anywhere, just because
Right.
it's something that's important to me. So yeah.
Yeah, it definitely seems worthwhile to especially talking
Yeah.
about like lower ranked schools. Like the connections they're making with that. Like, I mean, out of like pretty average schools, if you're an average grad, the employment market's not always like jumping at you. So it's like making those connections,
Right.
which you'll be fine. I'm sure you'll have like a wealth of opportunities. Like you'll be taking where to go. Um, but yeah, so kind of going off of that, you said it's nice to have like a break from the, I guess, legal related stuff. How many hours
Yeah.
do you find yourself doing like in a week? Like, is it pretty intense?
Of like studying
Yeah, I
or
guess just
class.
of anything law school related, whether it be class, studying, all that stuff.
Yeah, so I think this semester it's definitely a little bit busier for me because I'm also externing at the Federal Trade Commission. So I do that for about like 10 to 15 hours a week. And then for classes, I'm taking like 13 credits right now. A lot of those classes that I'm taking this semester are like paper and essay based. So a lot of writing happens like on my own time, not in class. But I would say like this semester has been particularly busy. I don't think there's one day that I've gone home before like 9 p.m.
Okay, yeah.
And I usually get to campus at like 10 a.m. So it is like 12-hour days.
Yeah, and that's I think that's good for people to hear. Okay, I'm largely like most of my people find me on Instagram. I run a little LSAT admissions account because you gotta get
Yeah,
balls. And I posted
right.
one day about how the LSAT is easier than law school because like I'm a big fan of like studying for 1 to 2 hours a day for like a few months, and that gets you to where you need to be. And I got
Mhm.
people mad about that. I was like, guys, I haven't been to law, but I've talked to people that have, and it doesn't sound like a walk in the park where you're just like barely showing up. So yeah, that's a lot. And um, crazy stuff there. I guess
Yeah,
quickly going into
absolutely.
the big law stuff, you hear some pretty wild
Yeah.
stories about the big law hours and kind of the grind in that. From your perspective, is all that true? Like, is it very much so a time intensive, like you're gonna work really hard, grind when you're there?
So I would say it is true, but there are certain factors that it depends on. For example, the firm that I was with my 1L summer, they do tend to be a little more relaxed. They're not ranked, super high. They don't bring in like the most revenue out of all the big law firms. So I do find that a lot of associates do have time to like do things on weekends and they have the flexibility to bring their work home at least, which is good. Though obviously it is still Big Law, so I know that everyone there is working really hard. It also very much depends on like the economy and which practice group you're in. So for example, over the summer, I was doing a little bit of work with the real estate group, and the real estate group was kind of like dead because we're in a recession and there was a lot of like bankruptcy stuff going on. So not a lot of people are like buying properties. And so I think it was a little bit quieter for them. Whereas for the bankruptcy group, things were exploding. Like everyone was working max hours all the time. I would say that in transactional practices, it does tend to be a little bit more like up and down with how much work you're putting in, just based on if you're currently on a deal, if you're currently like close to a closing or something like that. Whereas with a litigation-based group, it is going to be a little bit more stable because a lot of things that you're doing are more long-term and you can kind of like set your own schedule with those things. So that is another one of the reasons that litigation was attractive to me. But that being said, I think that the firm that I was at my 1L summer is kind of an anomaly because not a lot of people say that they have great work-life balance in Big Law, whereas I know a lot of the people at my firm did. And the firm that I'm going to be at this upcoming summer is kind of like notorious for working their associates pretty hard. So we'll see how it is. I'm kind of scared.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll do fine. It doesn't seem like you're scared of hard work because like you've been putting in a lot of hours. So I always worry about the people that got like a 2.9 in undergrad in like criminal justice and they like want to be a Big Law lawyer. I'm like, I don't know how many hours you put in back in class. Like this might not, which is okay. Like you don't have to like want work to be the center of your life, but like I don't know.
Right.
Not all paths are for everyone. But yeah, so that's funny that you mentioned that like they're ranked by revenue. See, I never think about that, but is that like a thing in like law school now it's not the top 14 schools, it's like the top X amount of firms? Is the hierarchy just always continues? Is it kind of that way?
The
Or?
hierarchy always continues. It
Yeah,
is funny because I've been thinking about that too. I think like, you know, before you go to law school, everyone's talking about like the T14 and like which schools
right.
you can get into. And then once you're kind of in this world where everyone wants to go to firms, it's like which firm is making the most money, which firm is paying their associates the most, which firm has like the biggest bonuses. And I just feel like it's funny because it is always going to be a thing, I feel like.
Yeah, well, once you're
Which
there,
is not
like
necessarily bad, but
yeah, it's
it's
like
just
who got the
funny.
biggest bonus, who's getting promoted,
Yeah.
who's stuck at like junior associate for 7 years. I don't know.
Yeah.
Which I don't know.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that inherently, but the game never ends. Like I think
Right.
where they're like viewing laws, like, oh, one day I'll be like retiring when I'm 45. It's like, maybe. I don't know. I'm not a fan of the concept of retirement. Like I consider myself a little bit of a workaholic too. I just went my own direction with it as opposed to law school. But like, yeah, when I talk to people and they're like, I want to clock out at 5 p.m. It's like, okay, I don't know that you should be hoping to go to Big Law. I'm not sure that's the field. But yeah, that's funny. I was looking at the
Yeah.
I was, if you see me stalking your LinkedIn, I've been using it to reference like what you're up
Oh,
to.
you're all good. No worries.
But it looks like you're going to, I'm not going to like dox you or anything, but it looks like you're going to #1 in terms of the firms this summer. Is that like a little point of pride, or is that just like the firm that ended up being the right fit for you?
I definitely think it is ultimately the firm that ended up being the right fit for me. They're the only firm that placed me directly in the practice group that I wanted to be in the most. My other offers were kind of for programs that would like rotate the associates around different groups. And I think that's great if you haven't had an experience in Big Law, but because I did my first summer in Big Law, I absolutely knew that I didn't want to do like finance, for example. And so I just think that, you know, going to a firm with that type of program would have been a little redundant for me. Whereas the firm that I'm going to place me directly into like IP patent litigation. And that's something that I know I want to do. So I just thought that at the end of the day, I would get the most like substantive work experience there. And it's funny because I think the fact that it's #1 actually like terrifies me a little bit because
Yeah,
I definitely am a little bit of a workaholic, obviously, but
I'd
I
imagine.
don't think that I want it to be like centered on that. So it'll be interesting to navigate after law school because summer programs, I feel like they don't really work their summer associates that hard. They kind of want to like one and
But they
done
want you
you.
to show up and like actually sign on the dotted line. Then once you're like,
Exactly.
then they kill you.
Yeah,
You did see
exactly.
the Big Law like slides that got leaked. I can't remember what firm it was, but it was like some senior associates training. I thought those were so funny. And everyone
Yeah.
in the pre-law space, because we're all disconnected, was like freaking out. They're like, "This isn't real." It's like, guys, I'm pretty sure this is. Like these are the expectations, which is like you work hard and you do a very good job. But yeah, I'll
Yeah.
like link this for anyone who like wants to see it. But it's just amusing stuff.
Yeah. I had a friend who was at that firm and they confirmed that it was real. And there was a lot of drama in that office around that time.
Yeah. Well, it's like I think it's one of those things where it's kind of like a don't ask, don't tell. Like they all know they're doing it, but no one's gonna actually come out and say that they're treating the associates like that.
Right.
Which
Yeah.
kind of brings me to a totally separate question. But I know you're busy, so you probably didn't have time to watch Suits when it had the whole Netflix craze. Did you guys watch that like at NYU, or were you guys all too busy doing like real lawyer stuff to worry about like some silly Netflix dramatization?
Oh my gosh. I did so I watched it before law school. And it's one of my favorite shows. I really like it.
Yeah.
It's like not at all realistic, but I think it's funny. It's a good
Yeah.
show.
I always tell people that I think the realistic character is Harold, like the poor associate who like is just like
Oh yeah.
great sounds.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks they're gonna be like Harvey, and it's like, yeah, maybe, probably not. I don't think his life looks like what they make it out to be. But yeah, it was actually
Yeah.
really good. Like weirdly enough, I saw a bump in like my impressions and like my metrics when Suits came out, which is so stupid because like
Wow.
people are not considering going to law school because of Suits. It's like this. I mean, maybe it was like the nudge in like a direction you're like, oh, this actually is for me, but I don't know if people are deciding based on that, might not be the best choice, but who knows, people will figure out their own situations. So yeah,
Yeah.
I won't take up too much of your time. I appreciate you doing this, but
Of
I
course.
guess if you had any advice for anyone like going into law school, what would you say? Like, how do you think people can succeed?
Yeah. I think the number one tip that I can give people going into law school is that before you start, you should definitely make sure you're in a place mentally to be able to put in a lot of work for like one semester or a year. And by that I mean like you definitely should be like mentally prepared, emotionally prepared. I know that if I had gone to law school immediately after undergrad, I would not have done very well. Just because I think that like having been in school for my entire life, I needed to take a break and get some real world work experience before deciding to put all of my time into law school because law school is not a 9 to 5. I think that's like law school, I didn't think it was going to be as hard as it was, but my first year, I literally was in the library starting at 7 a.m. every single day because that's when the school opened. And sometimes I would stay until like 10 or 11 p.m. And it was that every single day for my first semester. And granted, I did do well. And I think I'm very lucky to have done so, but it's just like such a commitment. You have to be like mentally healthy or working to get there to be able to kind of put in that work. Because beyond the physical like work aspect of it, there is a lot of like psychology that goes into it as well because there's so much pressure for you to do well. I think especially if you're kind of in like a school that's
Right.
similarly ranked as St. John's, everyone is struggling to do well and you don't know what your grades are until the end of the semester. So it's basically like a very terrifying ride for that first semester. And then the second semester it eases up a little, but then you have to face burnout. And so it's just like a constant cycle of work that you have to know how you want to deal with it. So I think that if you go in with a plan of like knowing how you work and knowing how you stress out and knowing how like your anxiety affects you, then I think that's definitely like the number one thing that you could do to help yourself.
Yeah. Well, and that also seems just be good life advice. Like figure your life out before you get on this like kind of path that you don't really get to take a pause and be like, oh, finals are next
Yeah.
week, but I'm having this situation, so I'll do them later. But yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting. And
exactly.
it sounds like you've done very well. Thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate it, and hopefully some people
Yeah.
are able to,